We continue now at the top of Daf Tzadi Vavam and Aleph and Mesechet Yevamos. This is Yevamos Daf 96a. On the previous Amud, there was a machlokas Rav and Shmuel. It said by a Yevama, so Rav says she's like an Eishes Ish, and Shmuel says a Yevama is not like an Eishes Ish. And it was unclear what exactly is the meaning of this machlokas Amoraim. And so Rav Huna explained that the case is as follows. Let's say you have a situation where a person's brother is Makadesh a woman, and then that brother who is Makadesh the woman, he goes L'Medinas Hayam, and they believe that he died. And so then what happens is the brother that's alive, he goes ahead and he marries the widow of his brother. Then it turns out the brother comes back, he was alive all along. And so Rav is being strict over here when he says Harei Ke'eshes Ish. What he means to say is as follows. We don't allow this woman to go back to the original brother who was Mekadesher because we're afraid people will get confused. And people will really think that what actually happened was that first brother who was Mekadesh, there was only a Kedushin. It wasn't an Isuin. So maybe it was a Kedushin al Tanai, and the condition was not fulfilled. Maybe she never had a Kedushin at all with the first brother. And maybe the marriage with the second brother was a completely good marriage. And so now if she goes back to the first brother, he's basically marrying the wife of his brother, and therefore Rav says this is going to be problematic. And now Shmuel, he disagrees, and Shmuel says, no, we're not afraid that people are going to think there's a Tanai in the Kiddushin. Now this actually posed a problem, because if that's how you understand what Shmuel is saying, that nobody's going to think there's a Tanai in Kiddushin, and that by Kiddushin situations it's not a problem, so the issue is because we have a Shita of Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah. Now Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah, his Shita in the Mishnah is also unclear. Rabbi Yossi just makes a statement, it's a vague statement that says anybody who disqualifies others disqualifies himself, anyone who doesn't disqualify others does not disqualify himself. But we had a number of interpretations in terms of what exactly Rabbi Yossi was saying in the Mishnah. And now one of the explanations of Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah was the explanation of Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says that what Rabbi Yossi is saying, what Rabbi Yossi means to say, is he's talking exactly about a similar kind of situation where you have a woman who is just an Arusa, and again, because of the fact that people will get confused and they'll think there's a Tanai in the Kiddushin, so therefore they're going to think it's like Machzer Grushas, so again, without going into all the details of the case, and that's why Rabbi Yossi said that in that case as well, the woman was disqualified from going back to her original husband. Now the problem is, Shmuel said that the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi. And so therefore, if Shmuel said the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi, you see that Shmuel does take into account this idea that people will think there's a Tanai in the Kiddushin, and that was the contradiction within Shmuel. And so now the Gemara is in the middle of answering that and saying, even if we go with Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha's interpretation of Rabbi Yossi, still maybe that's not exactly what Shmuel meant, because the truth is, Rabbi Yossi, there were two sides of Rabbi Yossi's statement. Because Rabbi Yossi had also said that in a situation where it's not a case of an Arusa, but it's a case of his actual wife, so in that case he said there's actually no disqualification, and the wives can return to their original husbands. And so that's exactly what the Gemara is saying over here. The Gemara says, V'dilma ayino posel. Maybe when Shmuel said the halacha was like Rabbi Yossi, he wasn't going on the Arusa part of Rabbi Yossi's statement at all. He was going on the part where we're talking about an actual wife, when the person's actual wife went L'Medinas Hayam. Again, without getting into the specifics of the case over there was that the person's wife and also his brother-in-law went to Medinas Hayam, but the point was there, Rabbi Yossi was actually lenient and said since there's no concern of Tanai, because we're talking about Nisuin over here, we're not talking about Erisin, so he said that the wives could return to their original husband, and maybe that's all that Shmuel meant, and therefore it would not contradict what Shmuel said when Shmuel said Eino Ke'eshes Ish in that situation of Yevamot. And the Gemara continues, Inami, or you could answer, in order to answer this contradiction in Shmuel, Mimai di Isla de Rav Huna. How do you even know that Rav Huna's interpretation of the Machlokas Rav and Shmuel is actually correct? Again, all it said over there was that Yevamot is like an Eishes Ish. That was according to Rav. And according to Shmuel, it's not like an Eishes Ish. That can mean many things. It doesn't have to mean what Rav Huna said, which involved this case of the brother and the Arusa. Dilma lezel de Rav Huna klal. Maybe what Rav Huna said is completely incorrect. Uvid Rav Hamnuna kamefilgi. And maybe really the Machlokas Rav and Shmuel is in the comment made by Rav Hamnuna, the psak of Rav Hamnuna. The Yom Rav Hamnuna, because Rav Hamnuna said, Shomeres Yavam Shezin. So let's say you have a situation of a woman who's awaiting Yibam, and then while she's awaiting Yibam, she commits Zanus. So Asura Liyavam. So Rav Hamnuna said she becomes prohibited through that act of Znus. She is prohibited to her brother-in-law. The Rav Amar Harei Ke'eshes Ish Umifsula Biznus. So Rav will say that she's considered like an Eishes Ish in that situation, and that's why she becomes disqualified when she has Nus. Ushmuel Amar, and Shmuel says, Eino Ke'eshes Ish. No, such a woman, Oshomeres Yavam, is not considered the same as an Eishes Ish, V'lo Mifsula Biznus, and therefore she does not become disqualified with Nus, and that of course would have nothing to do with our issue over here within Rabbi Yossi, who was discussing this idea that people will believe there might have been a Tanai in some Kiddushin. And the Gemara continues with another possible explanation of what the Machlokas Rav and Shmuel was, V'inami, or you can say, B'Kiddushin Tovsin B'Yevama Kamiflagi. They're simply arguing about whether Kiddushin takes effect by Yevama, meaning by you have a situation of a woman who is awaiting Yibum, and somebody else is Mekadesh, or is that going to take effect? The Rav Amar Harehi Ke'eshes Ish. Rav says, no, such a woman is considered like an Eshes Ish. V'lo tafsi but Kiddushin, the Kiddushin don't even take effect. U'Shmuel Amar, and Shmuel says, no, Eino Ke'eshes Ish. She's not considered like an Eshes Ish. V'tafsi but Kiddushin, and the Kiddushin do take effect. Again, maybe that's all they're arguing about. It's completely irrelevant to Shmuel saying that the halach is like Rabbi Yossi. Gemara asks on this explanation, but if that's the machlokas Rav and Shmuel, they've already argued about that one time. And to that the Gemara says, no, chadam mechlal dechaver to itmar. We're learning out one that's implied from the other. In other words, what they say in one place, we derived from there what their machlokas was, and then we were explaining what the machlokas was. And Rashi over here says, v'ifligu b'chadazimna, didn't Rav and Shmuel already argue about this once, b'hai pirka guf, in this parak itself, the Amar Shmuel ban Yuseinu tzricha get. Shmuel said exactly in this case, we don't know exactly what the halach is, but we're going to require a get, because we say maybe the Kiddushin was chal by the Yevamah, because she's not ke'eshes ish. And so again, the Gemara answered, Chodem Mechlal Dechaver to Itmar, really they only had the machlokas once. The second time it was recorded, they were really just recording it as an inference from the first time, deriving that this is what Rav and Shmuel are arguing about. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Amru lo Mesa Ishtacha. Let's say they tell a person, they say your wife has died. And he goes ahead and he marries her sister from her father's side. It turns out then really that his wife had not died, and therefore the marriage to his sister is nothing. So it turns out the first marriage to woman number one obviously is a good marriage. That was his original wife. But to woman number two is not going to be a good marriage. Mesa, then they tell him that woman, the second woman, has died. And he goes ahead and he marries her sister from her mother's side. Now it's her sister from her mother's side. So this third woman is not related, is not sisters to the first woman. And the marriage to the second woman was no good, so the marriage to the third woman is actually good. Mesa, then they tell him that this woman died, and then he goes ahead and marries her sister from her father's side. Now that marriage turns out again the woman didn't actually die, so this marriage is not going to be good. So again you have a situation here where the first marriage is good and the third marriage is good, the second and the fourth are not good. Now Mesa, now they say this fourth one, she died, and then he marries her sister from her mother's side. That is the fifth marriage, and that is also going to be a good marriage, because again the fourth marriage was no good, so the fifth marriage is good. And so the Mishnah says, V'nimsu kulan kayamas. It turns out all of these rumors were false. All of these women are actually alive. So as we just said, mutter barishona uveshlishis uvechamishis. He's going to be mutter with the first, third, and fifth wives. Those are not sisters to each other. Upotros tsarosein. And also those marriages are going to be good marriages, and therefore if they were to do yibum, so they're going to pater the co-wives. V'yaser b'shniur v'revias, however, he's forbidden to the second and the fourth wives. Those are not actual marriages at all. Ve'ein bias achas mehen poteres tzarasa. And so therefore, let's say one of them would perform yibum, one of them would have bia, that would not pater her co-wife, because again, that's not a good marriage in the first place. Now, the Mishnah says, let's say he actually had relations with the second wife only after the first wife actually died. So in that case, the one to the second one is going to be good. It's going to push everything off by one. So then mutter b'shniya uverevius. So then he's mutter to the second and the fourth wives. And again, upotros sarosei, and those marriages are full marriages. And therefore, if they were to do yibum, that would pater their co-wives. V'yaser b'shlishis uvechamishis. He's going to be forbidden to the third and the fifth wives. V'en bias achas mehen poteres saras. And again, the bia with one of them is not going to pater her co-wife, because again, these are not actually valid marriages. And Rashi over here explains, upotros sarosei, and again, what does it mean it's going to pater their co-wives? Meaning, in mace, let's say this guy would die, so now uba yavam, now the brother-in-law would come along, v'yivem es achas mehen, and he would do yibum with one of them, meaning one of the legitimate wives, so then niftarat sarasa, so then the co-wife becomes pater, because the yibum is taken care of. But again, if you're going to do the yibum with a non-legitimate wife, obviously it's not going to pater the co-wife. And Rashi over here says further, liachar misa sarishona, let's say he's only with the second wife after the first one actually dies. She'emes hayu hadavarm, was really true. Shall rishona, that the first one actually did die. Ushar hadavarm shekar hayu, and all the rest was not true. So then again, it pushes everything off one. The marriage to the second one is going to be good, not the third one. The fourth one is going to be good, etc. The same halachas follow. And the Mishnah continues, Ben Teisha Shadim v'Yom Echad. Let's say you have a child who's 9 years old in one day. So who posel al yadei achin? So if he does yibam, if he has relations with the Yevama, with the widow of his brother, so then he'll disqualify her to the brothers. V'achin posel al yado, and similarly the brothers, they can disqualify her to him. Ella, but the only difference is who posel tchila, he disqualifies her only if he has relations with her right at the outset, at the beginning. V'achin poslin tchila v'sof, but the brothers can disqualify her whether it's at the beginning or the end. And the Mishnah explains, Ketzad, how so? Ben Teisha Shana v'yomechad shebal Yevamto. Let's say you have a case of a 9-year-old, he has relations with his Yevama, so Pasal al Yedei Achin, he then disqualifies her to the brothers. Now subsequent to that, Bo al Achin, if the brothers have relations with her, V'yasu ba maimer, or they do a maimer, Nasnu get, or they give her a get, O Choltzu, or they do chalitza, in any of those cases, Poslan al yados, and then they're going to disqualify her to him. And Rashi over here explains, Hu posel tchila kishe bo al tchila, meaning if he's the first one to have relations with her, that creates a disqualification. Avalo besof, but if he does it after the brothers have already done something, so that's not going to cause anything. Kedem mefarish begemara, like the Gemara will explain. And then again, the Mishnah said, Poslan al yado, even if they're doing it after him. So in other words, he had relations first, and then they did either bia or maimer, etc. If they do any of those things, they disqualify her to him. Why? The reasoning is as follows. When he had relations with her at first, that wasn't a full kinyan. It only has the status of a maimer. And we've established earlier, that maimer or get or bia chalitza, they do have a chalos, they do take effect even after a maimer. So that's why when he has bia with her first, still if they do those things subsequent, they can create the disqualification to him. And the Gemara says, Atu kulu lav la'achar misas rishonin inu. The Gemara doesn't understand exactly what the Mishnah makes a distinction, because the Mishnah says if he's with the second woman after the death of the first, but wasn't that the whole case anyways? And so the Gemara explains, Amar Rav Sheshes says, la'achar misas rishona vadai. The difference between the second cases in the Mishnah and the first is that the second cases in the Mishnah, like we explained in the Mishnah, are talking about when you know for sure that the first wife died. If you know for sure the first wife died, then again, the marriage to the second sister is going to be good, and therefore it's going to be the second and the fourth that are going to be effective, whereas in the first part of the Mishnah, we didn't know for sure that the first wife died, and in fact, she had not died, and therefore when he married the second sister, that was not a good marriage, and therefore, again, in that first part of the Mishnah, it's the first, third, and the fifth marriages that are going to be considered effective. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Again, the Mishnah said, Ben Teisha Shanim V'chulu, talked about the fact that a 9-year-old, if he has bia with the Yevama, can create a disqualification. And so the Gemara says, Ben Teisha Shanim V'yom, so we're saying if he's 9 years old in one day, so then tchila pasul, if he has relations with her at first, that creates a disqualification. Besof lo pasul, but if he has it after the other brothers, it doesn't create anything, because again, like we said, when the other brothers, if they have, let's say, relations with the Yevama, so then what he does subsequent to that is not going to have any effect. But the Gemara asks, V'atani Rav Zvid B'Rav Oshia, but didn't Rav Zvid B'Rav Oshia teach ha'osa maimer b'yevamto, that if a person does a maimer with his Yevama, v'yachar kach ba'achiv shu ben tes shana v'yomechad Allah, and then after that, the brother who's 9 years old in one day has relations with her, so pasla, so in fact he does disqualify. So you see, this is a case of basof. Here you have the 9-year-old having the bia after the other brothers, and apparently it does create a psul. And so the Gemara answers, Amri, they answer as follows. Bia pasal afilo besof. If the 9-year-old has bia, that actually is effective to create a psul, even at the end. But maimer, but when it comes to that 9-year-old doing a maimer, let's say, which is, again, that's like the betrothal stage of the even process. So then tchila pasal, if he does it at first, it creates a disqualification. But besof lo pasal. But if he does it at the end, it does not create a disqualification. But the Gemara continues, Ubiya afila besof pasal, is this really true? Does relations even at the end, let's say it's a 9-year-old, does that create a disqualification? Vakatani, but didn't we learn in the Mishnah? Elishu posel tchila, v'hein tchila besof, it says he disqualifies if he's at the outset, if he's first, and they, whether it's at the beginning or the end. Ketzad how so? Ben teisha shana v'yomechad shebal yevamto v'chulu. It says talking about a 9-year-old who has relations, so you see it is talking about bia, and apparently when it comes to the 9-year-old, only if it's betchila, but if it's besof, it's not going to create a disqualification. And so to that, the Gemara says, there are words missing in the Mishnah, and you have to read it as follows. Again, if he's 9 years old, he creates the disqualification at the beginning, and they create the disqualification at the beginning and the end. When is this true? That's true by maimer, meaning if he does the maimer at the end, it's going to have no effect. But when it comes to bia, then he would create the disqualification, even if he does it after the other brothers. Ketzad how so? Ben tes shanim v'yomechad habal yevamto. Let's say you have a situation of a 9-year-old, he has relations with the Yevama, pasal al yedei achin, so then he's going to create the disqualification to the brothers, etc. But the Gemara continues, umiyaslei maimer klal al yedei achin, but does this 9-year-old, does the maimer take any effect at all in terms of disqualifying her to the brothers? V'atanya, but we learned in a brisa not like that. The brisa says, ben tes shanim v'yomechad, when it comes to this 9-year-old child, who posal b'davar echad, he only disqualifies her with one thing, meaning only with bia. But the brothers can disqualify her to him with 4 different things. And the Brisa explains, who posel al yadei achin bebia, he can disqualify her to the brothers through bia. V'achin posel al yado bebia b'maimer begetuv chalitza. But the brothers can create the disqualification whether through bia, maimer, get, or chalitza. And so therefore you see clearly from this Brisa that maimer doesn't work at all, whether it's betchila or v'sof, when it comes to this ben tes shon of yom echad. And so the Gemara answers, bia de pasla bein betchila bein besof. When it comes to bia, which he can disqualify her whether at the beginning or the end, so psikole. So that's across the board. So that's what we mean to say in all situations that is effective by the 9-year-old. But when it comes to Maimer, there are distinctions. The betchila pasl, besof lo pasl. If he does it betchila, then it does create the disqualification. If he does it besof, it does not. So lo psikole. So therefore the Brisa didn't teach it because again, it does not apply across the board. And the Gemara continues, Itmar Nami, this was taught as well by the Amoraim. Amar Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel, Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, Yesh lo get, when we're talking about the 9-year-old, he does give a get, meaning that can create the disqualification. V'chein Amar Rav Tachlifa bar Avime, so too says Rav Tachlifa bar Avime, Yesh lo Maimer, that Maimer is effective by the 9-year-old. And the Gemara says, Tanya Nami Hachi, we have a brisa that supports this as well, Yesh lo get, v'yesh lo Maimer, Divrei Ravi Meir. He has both get and he has Maimer as well, according to Ravi Meir. But the Gemara continues, V'sava Ravi Meir, Yesh lo get. Does Ravi Meir really hold that a 9-year-old the get is effective in order to disqualify her to the other brothers? V'atanya, but we learned in a brisa, asu bias bentesha kemaimer begadol. It says that when it comes to the bia of a child who's 9 years old, that's the same as maimer by an adult. Ravi Meir says asu chalitzas bentesha. The chalitza of a 9-year-old is the same kiget begadol as a get by an adult. And so the Gemara asks, V'misa, now if it's really true that Rabbi Meir holds a get works by a minor as well, by a 9-year-old as well, listening kigito, so it should have said the chalitza of a ben tesha is like his get, because a ben tesha can also give a get. The implication of this brisa is that according to Rabbi Meir, a ben tesha cannot give a get. It does not cause any disqualification. And so the Gemara says, Amar Rav Huna Breder Rav Yoshua. Rav Huna Breder Rav Yoshua says, he answers, Islay v'zuter. No, Rabbi Meir holds that there is some chalos of the get when it comes to a minor, when it comes to a 9-year-old, but it is less than a get given by an adult. It's not as strong. And the Gemara explains as follows. Rabbi Gamliel, for example, according to the sheet of Rabbi Gamliel, Diyamar ein get achar get. Rabbi Gamliel in general says that if a get's already been given, so then another get is given, it's not going to take any effect. But hani mili begadol achar gadol v'katan achar katan. That's only true. Let's say an adult gave the first get, and then an adult is giving the second get. The second get is not going to have an effect. Or let's say a minor gave the first get, and then a minor gave the second get. The second get is not going to have any effect. But let's say you have a situation of an adult giving the get after a katan, so mahani, so then it is going to be effective. In other words, the katan's get is not as effective because when the katan gives a get, if a gadol gives a get after, it's still going to create a disqualification. And the Gemara explains further, L'Rabbanan, now according to the Rabbanan's shita, the Amri Yesh Get Achar Get, they hold, not like Rabbi Gamliel, they hold that there is such a thing as a get, and a get is able to be chal after a get's already been given. So Hani Mili Begadol Achar Gadol Bekatan Achar Katan, that's only true if it's an adult after an adult, or a minor after a minor. Only in those cases are we going to say that the second get is effective. Aval katan achar gadol lo mahani. But if a katan gives a get after a gadol, after one of the brothers who was a gadol gave a get, then a katan gives a get, that's not going to have any effect. So again, the idea being that the get of a katan is effective, but not at the same level as a gadol. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Tzadi Vav Amud Beis.